welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a pretty fascinating intellectual adventure. We're not just sticking to one narrow subject. Instead, we're exploring these surprising connections between, innovation, marketing, and, well, why we humans do the things we do.
Right. And our source material for this is Malcolm Gladwell's collection of essays, What the Dog Saw.
Exactly.
We've gathered a really diverse set of topics from these essays. I mean, think about it. We'll be looking at everything from, kitchen gadgets, everyday stuff, all the way to the really complex world of criminal profiling.
Right.
And what's captivating is how Gladwell connects them, showing these underlying principles of human psychology, decision-making, things that link these areas that seem totally unrelated. And importantly, just how tricky prediction can be.
Totally. We're going to dissect the marketing genius of Ron Popeil, try to get to the bottom of the great ketchup debate.
The ketchup conundrum.
Yes. And even uncover the surprisingly complex science behind spaghetti sauce. But that's really just a taste. We'll also look at the challenges of intelligence analysis, delve into why we sometimes choke under pressure.
Oh, yeah.
And try to make sense of criminal profiling, plus the difficulties in hiring the right people. It's a real treasure trove.
And for you, the learner, our goal here is really to pull out the most valuable nuggets, the key insights from all these varied sources.
I found a shortcut.
Exactly, a shortcut to understanding these complex ideas without feeling, overwhelmed. We're hoping for those aha moments, those surprising facts that might just shift how you see things a little.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Ron Popeil, a true innovator in direct-to-consumer sales.
Definitely.
But his story actually starts a bit earlier, doesn't it? With his great-uncle, Nathan Morris.
That's right. Nathan was like a classic pitchman, the kind you'd see selling clever kitchen gadgets, maybe on a boardwalk. He even started his own manufacturing company.
And that knack for business seemed to, run in the family. His son's brother-in-law, even his brother and nephew, S.J. Popeil, Ron's father, they all got into the trade.
It really shows the power of that early direct sales model, S.J. Popeil, Ron's dad, he became a real force himself. He was the mind behind things like the Dial-O-Matic, the Chop-O-Matic, the Veg-O-Matic, And by all accounts, quite a character. He had these little sayings like telling his lawyer, if they push you far enough, Sue, or telling Ron, it's not how much you spend, it's how much you make. And my favorite, about his pocket fisherman, it's not for using, it's for giving.
That says so much about the impulse buy, doesn't it?
It really does. And the family story takes a bit of a dark turn, too.
Yeah, that was wild. SJ's second wife hired people to hurt him.
Thankfully, they didn't succeed. But then, incredibly, after she got out of prison, he remarried her.
Unbelievable. Like his colleague said, he was a strange bird.
Definitely strange. But also, like his son Ron, a relentless experimenter, always sketching ideas, tinkering in the kitchen.
Which brings us neatly to the Showtime rotisserie.
Right. And the inspiration for that, surprisingly, came from Costco.
Really? Costco?
Yeah. Ron saw these huge lines of people waiting for rotisserie chickens, and it just clicked. People love this stuff, but most can't make it at home.
So he teamed up with an engineer.
Exactly. Started experimenting right in his kitchen. Aquarium glass, motors, heating elements, the whole deal.
And he was really hands-on, wasn't he? His patent attorney apparently saw multiple prototypes cooking chickens side by side in Ron's house.
Meticulous. He wanted to compare them. And he had specific ideas, big enough for a turkey, small enough for a counter. No thermostat. He thought they failed too often.
And the horizontal spit. That was key, right? To stop the top drying out.
Crucial. By the end, the Showtime had something like 24 patent applications covering all its innovations.
Wow. Now let's talk about his infomercial strategy. It was quite different from regular ads.
Oh, completely. No fancy production or celebrities. The product was the absolute star.
Right. You remember those shots, the delicious 6-pound chicken, the succulent whole duckling?
Yeah, just rotating, glistening. Makes you hungry just thinking about it.
And only then would Ron come in, explain the benefits, show how easy it was.
And those taglines. Set it and forget it.
Instantly recognizable. It's practically part of the language now.
He'd show himself prepping the chicken, putting it in, walking away. It wasn't about him. It was about how the product made your life easier.
It really illustrates that principle.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best marketing just shows the user's benefit, the ease of use.
Which leads to this idea, we could call it the Popeil principle of designing products for demonstration.
Ah, interesting. Explain that.
Well, Ruan understood instinctively that to sell on TV, the product had to look good in action. Its function needed to be immediately obvious.
So like if you designed a VCR.
Exactly. It wouldn't have hidden tape slots. He'd probably want visible schools so you could see it recording, big clicky buttons, maybe even numbered steps printed on it.
Making the process totally transparent.
Making the intangible tangible. He wanted products that popped on camera because, like he knew, the better it looks in the demo, the easier it is to sell.
Makes sense.
Even on QVC, apparently, he was incredibly demanding. Obsessed with presentation, the hero plates of food.
High stakes for him.
Huge pressure to keep proving himself.
Okay, so shifting gears now. From Ron Popeil's world to ketchup. Seems simple, right?
Huh. You'd think so. But even ketchup tells us a lot about consumer desire.
Let's start with mustard, actually. For ages, it was just yellow mustard, basically.
Pretty much the standard. Then Grey Poupon comes along.
Right. Positions itself as sophisticated, charges more.
And it works. Sales took off. Suddenly, supermarkets had huge mustard sections. It showed consumers would pay more for, well, an image and maybe a more complex taste. Challenged the idea that basic tastes were fixed.
And that inspired Jim Wiggin. He wanted to create the Grey Poupon of ketchup.
That was the ambition. His world's best ketchup had more tomato solids, even maple syrup. He did demos at Zabar's in New York.
How'd they go?
Mixed reactions. Some people were intrigued. Wiggin famously told one person, maybe a bit bluntly, because you've been eating bad ketchup all your life. Yeah. But a lot of people were just confused, didn't buy it. Wiggin thought if he made a technically better ketchup, people would switch, like with the mustard. It wasn't that straightforward.
This is where Howard Moskowitz comes in, right?
Yeah.
With spaghetti sauce.
Exactly. He had a totally different approach to figuring out what people want. He didn't trust traditional focus groups much.
Why not?
He felt people often can't really articulate what they want if they haven't experienced it yet. His famous idea, the mind knows not what the tongue wants.
So what did he do instead?
Well, with Campbell's, they developed something like 45 different kinds of spaghetti sauce.
45?
Yeah, varying everything, spiciness, thickness, chunkiness. Got sensory analysts to rate them, then took them to consumers.
And a big discovery.
People didn't all want the same thing. Preferences clustered, there were segments, plain, spicy, and extra chunky.
Extra chunky. And nobody was really making that.
Bingo. At the time, almost none on the shelves. This ignored segment turned out to be huge for Prego. Hundreds of millions in sales. It completely changed the spaghetti sauce aisle.
Wow. So let's circle back to Wiggins' world's best ketchup then. How did it measure up in sensory terms?
Analysis showed it had lower amplitude, didn't have that immediate flavor punch of Heinz, and it had this lingering, cooked tomato-y flavor.
Making it feel more like a sauce than classic ketchup.
Kind of. And then you have Andrew Smith, the tomato historian.
Right.
His take is that classic ketchup is already like a near-perfect expression of the tomato. It's cheap, it's familiar, it's deeply ingrained. Trying to reinvent it, like Wiggin did, maybe missed the point of what ketchup is for most people.
So the ketchup story really shows it's not just about making something technically better.
Not at all. Consumer desires are complicated, sometimes subconscious. What seems like an obvious improvement might clash with deep-seated expectations.
All right, let's shift focus again. Now into the world of theories, predictions, diagnoses, where things get pretty uncertain.
A good starting point is Nassim Taleb's perspective. He's critical of relying too much on high-probability, low-impact events.
Right. He admired the investor Victor Niederhoffer's success, but was skeptical.
Deeply skeptical that it was all skill. He raised the very real possibility, maybe even probability, of sheer dumb luck playing a massive role.
And Taleb's own firm, Empirica, had a specific strategy.
Very specific. Trading options, basically betting on unlikely but high-impact events, like a stable stock suddenly dropping sharply.
Low probability, massive potential payout.
Exactly, that asymmetry. But psychologically, it's tough.
How so?
Most traders get positive feedback from small, regular wins. Empirica's experience was often the opposite. Lots of small losses, then bam, a huge, infrequent win.
That must mess with your head.
For sure. Taleb apparently developed superstitious tics. He relied on his colleagues to keep him focused on the long game.
And Niederhoffer, despite his success, he eventually hit a wall too.
He did. A major setback. A stark reminder that nobody's immune to failure, right? He apparently compared losing his business to losing loved ones.
Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah. But interestingly, he found perspective by studying big disasters, the Titanic, the Essex. To stay humble, remind himself of risk.
It really highlights that uncertainty, doesn't it? Whether it's finance or launching a product, past success isn't always a guarantee.
Absolutely. Factors beyond our control can just change everything.
Okay, let's pivot again. Let's explore the power of perception and also the limits we face, even with lots of information.
Starting with Shirley Polikoff and hair color ads, just brilliant work.
She really understood women's psychology, didn't she? That Miss Clairol tagline. Does she or doesn't she? Only her hairdresser knows for sure.
Perfect. It tapped into wanting change, but also wanting discretion.
And for nice and easy, the closer he gets, the better you look.
And Lady Clairol.
If I've only one life, let me live it as a blonde.
These weren't just slogans. They hit deep desires, anxieties about identity, appearance, and the impact was huge. Hair coloring rates soared during her campaigns. She understood her audience.
Now contrast that with L'Oreal's "Because I'm Worth It." Different approach.
Totally different. The model speaks directly to you. It's about self-worth, empowerment.
And the models they chose. Meredith Baxter Birney, Sybil Shepherd.
Women who seem strong, but maybe a bit vulnerable too. It created this niche, smart, bold, brassy blondes.
Okay, now let's look at a case where good intentions had, well, unintended negative consequences. John Rock and the birth control pill.
Right. He genuinely believed it was natural because it mimicked progesterone, which stops ovulation during pregnancy.
And he had this theological argument, too, trying to make it acceptable to the Catholic Church.
Yeah, he argued it created a pill-established safe period. Similar morally to the rhythm method, this thinking led to the standard 28-day cycle with that week of placebo pills.
To mimic a natural cycle.
Exactly. But that placebo week, designed partly to appease the church, actually caused unnecessary suffering for many women, pain, bloating, headaches.
All because of the withdrawal bleed.
It wasn't until much later that extended cycle pills came along, reducing those side effects. Shows how strong beliefs, even well-intentioned, can sometimes overlook the biological facts.
Okay, from pharma to a more intuitive field. Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer.
His whole thing is understanding dogs through body language, energy.
Like with that nervous dog, Sugar. Just a shh sound, delivered calmly, had a huge effect.
He watches everything, how a dog leans, head tilt, eye contact, even breathing. Animal behaviorists confirm dogs are super attuned to our expressions, our posture.
And Karen Bradley, the movement expert, analyzed his movements.
Using Laban movement analysis, yeah. She called his movement beautifully organized intraphysically. Fluidity, harmony between posture and gesture, what they call phrasing. He sends clear signals.
That intervention with the aggressive dog, John B., it looked intense.
It did, but he wasn't fighting the dog. He was more like providing structure for John B.'s emotional outburst, like an understanding parent guiding a child through a tantrum to help them regulate.
Regulation versus dysregulation.
Exactly. His timing, his calmness, crucial. He used a similar approach with an upset child, Eric. Rocking, stable presence, calming.
But it doesn't always work, right?
Yeah.
The case with Bandit.
Right. The owner wouldn't let Caesar touch the dog much. It shows the limits the owner's role is critical. Even his intuition couldn't overcome that barrier.
Okay, let's switch to the danger of too much information. Enron is the classic case here.
Oh, absolutely. Andrew Weil, the accounting expert, looked at their books. Big gap between reported profits and actual cash flow.
Because of mark-to-market accounting. Booking future potential earnings now.
That was a huge part of it. So much of Enron's claimed revenue was unrealized, just projections. If you took those out, their actual cash coming in was tiny.
For one of the biggest companies in the U.S. at the time.
Unbelievable. But they weren't actually making much cash. Short sellers like James Chano saw it too, falling margins, drying up cash.
So having all that complex financial data didn't help clarify things.
It actually created a mystery, not a puzzle. A puzzle gets simpler with more info. Enron was so complex, even board members, maybe even the CFO, didn't fully grasp the deals, the SPEs.
Interesting contrast with Allied intelligence in WWII and the German superweapon.
Right. There, information was scarce, potentially misleading. Treating it as a mystery, acknowledging the uncertainty worked better than trying to force limited data into a premature answer.
Okay, let's look at another pattern, focusing on the outliers. The $1 million Murray case in Reno.
Yeah, this story highlighted how a tiny number of chronically homeless people consume a huge chunk of public resources, ER visits, jail time, etc.
The officer, O'Brien, saw that panhandling wasn't the core issue for many. It was often addiction.
And researchers like Dennis Colthane in New York found this power law distribution.
Explain that again.
Think of a graph with a long tail. A few extreme cases, the chronically homeless account for a massive share of the costs. Most others use far fewer resources, maybe just episodically homeless.
And this led to the housing first idea.
Exactly. Provide stable housing and support first without preconditions like sobriety. It seems counterintuitive to focus resources on the toughest cases.
But it might actually save money overall.
That's the economic argument. Fewer ER visits, less jail time, etc. It reduces those costs. But it definitely raises moral questions about resource allocation.
And this power law thing pops up elsewhere, too.
Oh, yeah. Air pollution, a few old cars causing most of the emissions. LAPD complaints, a small number of officers getting most of the complaints. It's a common pattern.
Okay, back to information limitations. The Scud hunt in the Gulf War.
Pilots had advanced cameras, land him, but at night, depth perception is off, visibility is low.
Hard to tell real launchers from decoys.
Exactly. From a distance, under pressure. That old idea, photography cannot lie, it proved false there. Interpretation is key, and context matters.
Similar issues with mammography, right? It's vital, but not perfect.
Correct. A tumor's visibility depends on the breast tissue density around it, and you get interval cancers showing up between screenings.
And that Danish autopsy study found lots of undetected DCIS.
Yeah, ductal carcinoma in situ. Pre-invasive lesions, found in women who died of other causes, suggesting many might never have become life-threatening cancer. Raises the whole issue of potential overdiagnosis.
So maybe screening finds things that wouldn't have caused harm.
That's the concern. Dr. Dersha, the radiologist, stresses focusing on what mammography can reliably find, not overpromising or focusing on what it might miss, understanding the limits of the tech.
Okay, let's dive into intellectual property. The play Frozen and Dorothy Lewis.
Yeah, the playwright Bryony Lavery drew heavily on Lewis's life story. Lewis felt, understandably, quite violated seeing her experiences on stage.
But legally it's complicated, isn't it? Copyright isn't just don't copy.
Not at all. It's about what you copy and how much. Intellectual property law actually allows for some borrowing, building on existing work. That's why copyrights and patents expire eventually to encourage progress.
Like in music, composers borrowing and transforming ideas.
Exactly. It's a constant dialogue. The key is whether it's transformative, adding something new, interpreting versus just derivative, basically a close copy.
So Lavery could create a fictional character, Agnetha, inspired by Lewis, as long as the details were different.
Right. Agnetha's story, her affair, wasn't Lewis's actual encounter with Ted Bundy. That's a crucial difference. It might feel unsettling, even unethical to the person whose life is the inspiration.
But legally, it might not be infringement, unlike outright plagiarism. Art versus ethics gets blurry.
Very blurry. Now, finally, let's touch on the intelligence failures before 9/11.
A huge challenge there was just information overload, right? Too much noise hiding the signal.
Absolutely. Despite general warnings about a Hiroshima-type threat, specific actionable intelligence was scarce. The FBI reportedly had, 68,000 outstanding leads?
68,000. How do you sort through that?
And interpreting ambiguous intel is tough. Even when there are warnings, what do they really mean? How immediate is the threat? Think of Rosenhan's pseudo-patient study.
Where people faked mental illness symptoms to get admitted, then acted normally.
Yeah, and found it incredibly hard to convince staff they were sane. The initial diagnosis stuck.
Organizational issues, too. Lack of communication, like before Pearl Harbor, or groupthink, like the Bay of Pigs?
Both problems led to this debate. Centralize intelligence or keep constructive rivalry between agencies. Post 9/11, the move was towards centralization with the Terrorist Threat Integration Center.
But some argue the old system had value, like the info on Musawi from Minneapolis or a Phoenix memo.
Exactly. Those came from focused local investigations. It highlights the value of diverse perspectives. Major General Zira, after the Yom Kippur War, talked about the pressure on intel chiefs to give definite answers, even when unsure.
Which can lead to being confidently wrong.
Precisely. A huge risk.
All right, let's shift to the art of failure. Specifically, choking versus panicking.
A key distinction. Jana Novotná at Wimbledon in '93.
Oh, I remember that. Heartbreaking. She was so close.
Classic choking. Paradoxical failure of skills you know well, right when the pressure is highest.
Whereas panicking is different.
Yeah, panicking is more like failing because you lack the skill or knowledge for the situation. Like John F. Kennedy Jr.'s plane crash, likely disorientation, lack of instrument flying experience under stress. That's panic.
And stereotype threat can also cause failure under pressure.
Definitely. Fearing you'll confirm a negative stereotype about your group. Black students and intelligence tests, women in math, even white athletes, and jumping that fear itself can hurt performance.
What about the Challenger disaster? Was that choking or panicking?
Neither, really. It was more a consequence of NASA's culture of deviance. Questionable technical decisions, like with the O-rings, became normalized over time. Safety margins eroded. They thought they were following rules, but the underlying culture, the understanding of risk, was flawed.
Tied into that idea of risk homeostasis.
Sort of, where safety measures sometimes get offset by people changing their behavior, like maybe pedestrians being less careful in crosswalks or more child poisonings after child-proof lids because parents got complacent. Unintended consequences.
Interesting. Let's look at Ben Fountain, the writer who used to be a lawyer.
His story shows the leap into a creative field, the discipline needed, but also how unpredictable the process can be. His trips to Haiti were transformative, but not planned.
Which connects to David Gallinson's theory about creators, conceptual versus experimental.
Right. Conceptual creators, like Picasso, often have a clear goal and work towards it. Experimental ones, like Cézanne, discover their goal through the process, learning by doing.
And late bloomers are often experimental.
Often, yeah. They might just take longer to figure things out to get good. And they often depend heavily on patrons, people who support them along the way. Cézanne needed Zola, Pissarro, others. Success isn't always solitary.
Like the quarterback problem in football, hard to predict who will succeed.
Very hard. College skills, especially from certain offenses like the spread, don't always translate to the NFL. Evaluating potential is tricky.
Similar to evaluating teachers, using test scores for value-added analysis.
That's one way, but it has limits. Robert Pianta's research focuses more on those crucial moments of engagement in the classroom, how teachers respond in those instances.
He found missed opportunities even in preschool.
Yeah, moments where a teacher could have deepened learning but didn't quite connect. It's subtle but important.
Contrast that with how Northwestern Mutual hires financial advisors John Deutschlander's approach.
Totally different. They cast a super wide net, hire lots of people, and then invest heavily in training and development over the long haul. The gate is wide open initially.
Interesting. A lot more patience and investment there than often happens with selecting teachers.
A stark contrast, really.
Okay, last big area. Theories of deduction. Profiling and snap judgments.
Let's start with James Brussel and the Mad Bomber, an early attempt at profiling.
He analyzed the bomber's letters, the crime scenes, made deductions.
About personality, background, motivations, even appearance.
But how accurate was he?
Not very in the end. Wrong about the hometown, a facial scar, job history, age, Slavic origin. Quite a few misses. Shows the limits of basing profiles on assumptions and limited data.
But profiling developed further at the FBI, right? Teton, John Douglas.
Yeah, the behavioral science unit. They developed typologies like organized versus disorganized offenders. Douglas tried to get inside the heads of criminals.
And made predictions based on these types. Victim choice, maybe jobs they'd have.
Right, like predicting the trailside killer might have a speech impediment because he seemed to need seclusion, suggesting self-consciousness.
Did that turn out to be right?
It actually did in that case. But it's not always accurate. Look at the South Florida rapist case. The profile got the race and personality wrong. Generalizations are risky.
And studies show profiling doesn't often lead directly to arrests.
Some analyses, like one from the British Home Office, suggest a surprisingly low direct hit rate. It might help focus investigations, but it's not a magic bullet.
Let's loop back to Enron quickly through the lens of the talent myth.
Skilling's focus on hiring star MBAs, creating this competitive internal culture.
The assumption was talent alone equals success.
Right. But they ignored the downsides, the turnover, the backstabbing potentially. Even McKinsey, their consultants, pushed this talent myth. They didn't see the need to fix the system, the box, just find stars to think outside it.
Which ties into tacit knowledge, practical intelligence.
Exactly. Knowing how to manage yourself, manage others, navigate situations. It's not just book smarts. Carol Dweck's work on mindsets is relevant too.
Fixed versus malleable. Believing intelligence can grow.
Yeah. If you have a fixed mindset, you avoid challenges because you fear looking dumb. That holds you back.
Yet, we can make accurate snap judgments sometimes. Nalini Ambati's research.
On thin sliced judgments, yeah. People could rate teacher effectiveness pretty accurately from very short, silent video clips, amazing intuitive capacity.
But for deeper assessments, like interviews.
Justin Menkes argues for digging deep into past behavior, not asking superficial questions. And structured interviews, standardized questions, rating scales try to reduce bias, focus on relevant skills, reject irrelevant info.
Kelly's critique of profiling. The category problem.
Right. Profiling relies on categories, but people know about categories and might try to defy them, like the 9/11 hijackers try and blend in. Categories aren't stable.
Like the pit bull debate. Generalizing about a breed's aggression.
Perfect example. It's generalizing about a generalization. Evidence suggests aggression is more about breeding for fighting, training, owner issues, not an inherent breed trait. And which breeds are seen as dangerous changes over time anyway?
So the link between categories and traits isn't fixed, like crime rates and police presence, or smugglers changing tactics.
Exactly. It's dynamic. Relying on fixed generalizations to predict behavior is inherently flawed.
Wow. That was quite a journey through a lot of interconnected ideas.
It really was. A comprehensive exploration, all stemming from Gladwell's essays.
What stands out is how these different stories keep circling back to similar themes, doesn't it?
Definitely. The power of perception, how we see things, shapes so much. The challenge of prediction, it's just really hard in complex systems. Human motivation, messy, contradictory sometimes.
The huge importance of context, and yeah, the limits of just lumping things into broad categories or generalizations.
And for you listening, we hope this deep dive gives you a richer way to look at the world, seeing these principles play out in all sorts of places.
So as a final thought, maybe consider, where might that talent myth be operating in your own work or life? How much are snap judgments shaping your view of others?
And maybe ask, what boxes, what established systems or ways of doing things might need fixing, instead of just telling everyone to think outside them.
Some interesting things to chew on. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.